The Great Gatsby has quite the ending. It's not a very pleasant one or a gradual one. Instead, we get a sudden, instantaneous death, and then the aftermath of Gatsby's life. Like most of the books that we've ended up reading in English this year, The Great Gatsby certainly falls into into the genre of a tragedy in some ways. We talked about tragedies back in English 1, about a protagonist's fatal flaw that's going to lead them to their destruction. And there are certainly similarities between the ancient Greek tragedies and what we have here in The Great Gatsby. One of the things that was true about the ancient Greek tragedies and is true about the Great Gatsby is that while they may not have happy endings, they do have meaningful ones. Because there are things I think Fitzgerald is trying to suggest at the end of the Great Gatsby. So what I want to do today is I want to look at 3 different things we can learn from the conclusion of the Great Gatsby, and 3 different areas that Fitzgerald is aiming some criticism at. Okay. The first thing I want to look at is I want to look at what the ending of The Great Gatsby suggests about the society of the Roaring Twenties. Okay? As you learned about in history, the 20s were certainly a time of decadence. They were a time of a lot of material success for certain types of people, and we can see that in The Great Gatsby. And yet one of the things that I think Fitzgerald is suggesting in The Great Gatsby is that these times don't last forever. They can't last forever. Because there is a certain carelessness about this decadence that will lead to destruction. Now, one of the things that makes this book rather prophetic is the fact that, The Great Gatsby was written before the Great Depression. All right? Fitzgerald had no idea that the Roaring Twenties would be followed by such a depression. And yet it seems that he might have had some foresight into it because Fitzgerald realized that this couldn't last forever. Gatsby can't be throwing these decadent parties all night. There are tensions with the way that the upper class live, with the way that they disregard morals that will lead to ruin. And that's what we see at the end of The Great Gatsby. Okay? We see that the society of decadence can't last forever. The second thing that we can see here in The Great Gatsby is we can see the poetic justice for the way that the women in this book were living, and in simply the role of women in this time. Okay, we talked in class a couple weeks ago about Daisy's quote that all that we can that a woman should just be a beautiful little fool in life, and we talked about the problems with the way that women were treated in the pages of these books, and even the way that Fitzgerald portrays them as not being very high. And we talk about, if all the women in this book are living an experiment in living that says that we should just act like beautiful little fools because that's all society expects of us, well, the question we were looking for is, well, what's a poetic justice for this? Is this what Fitzgerald believes, that women should just be beautiful little fools, or should we see something else? Okay. Now, certainly people come on different sides of this debate on whether or not Fitzgerald is critiquing the way that women are treated at his time, or whether he's going along with it. I would argue that when you look at the end of the book, what we see is a critique. Okay. As Nick is, reminiscing on the whole affair, he's thinking about Tom and he's thinking about Daisy, and he says this. He says, I couldn't forgive Tom or like him, but I saw that what he had done was to him entirely justified. It was all very careless and confused. They were careless people, Tom and Daisy. They smashed up things and creatures and then retreated back into their money or their vast carelessness or whatever it was that kept them together, and let other people clean up the mess they had made. Certainly there's a fair bit here that's a critique of the way that the upper class is living, the way of just living as they want and letting everyone else pick up the pieces or feel the consequences of what they've experienced. Well, we don't see Daisy experiencing any consequences, negative consequences though, for the way that she's acting like a beautiful little fool. We can see how this is affecting those around her. And this is part of Nick's critique of her, is that she might not suffer the poetic justice for what she's done because she's rich enough. But there's a lot of negative poetic justice happening to everyone else because she decides to act this way. Okay? And this quote should remind us of something that Jordan said earlier on. Earlier on in the story, Nick and Jordan are going on a drive, and they're talking, about their driving. And as they're driving, Nick's talking about, how careless, Jordan can be as a driver. He says, "You're a rotten driver. Either you ought to be more careful, or you oughtn't to drive it at all." And Jordan at first tries to say, "Well, she says, I am careful." Nick points out, "No, you're not." And she says, "Well, other people are." "What's that got to do with it?" Nick asked. "Well, they'll keep out of my way," Jordan insisted. "It takes two to make an accident," okay? And this line, "it takes two to make an accident," is a rather famous line, and we can see here some similarities between the way that Jordan has lived her life and the way that Daisy has lived her life. Both of them are living their lives carelessly. Both of them are living their lives saying, "Well, yes, maybe I'll be careless, but it's the other person's fault if there's an accident. It takes two careless people to meet. I'm just going to hope that no one else is as careless as I am." Problem being, of course, that both of them do meet people who are as careless as they are. And I think what we're seeing here is Fitzgerald has pointed out that there is a problem if women in this era say, "Well, people just expect us to be beautiful little fools, and so that's how we're going to act." Because we can see that what happens when they act this way, well, other people suffer. Now, all right. So Fitzgerald has a critique in this book of women acting this way. Does he have a critique of a society that treats women in this way? That's much harder to say. You could certainly make the argument that says, well, if he's critiquing women acting like beautiful little fools, well, he should also, by implication, critique a society that expects women to act this way. And yet we don't really get the criticism of the dehumanizing ways that this society treats women that we'd want. We want to see, perhaps more of a critique of the objectification of women in the pages of The Great Gatsby that we may get. You can certainly make the argument that there is a criticism in the book of the objectification of women in the pages of this story, but you can also argue that that Fitzgerald is portraying the time but not critiquing in this regard. I'll leave that for you to think about. The final thing, the third thing I want us to look at, is I want us to realize is the critique that this book makes on the American dream. Okay. One of the tensions that we were exploring in class earlier this week is the tension between the American dream, which is forward-looking, and Gatsby, and who is rather, past-oriented, right? Gatsby wants to return to the past. He wants to see things to be like where they are in the past, and this creates a tension between him trying to live the American dream, forward-looking, in an effort to, get back the past, which is backward-looking. All right? And one of the things we of course see is that this attempt fails. All right, Gatsby's attempt to move to use these forward-looking things to regain the past, had a fundamental tension in it that couldn't be resolved. Okay, and his attempt to try and repeat the past was doomed to failure. You can't achieve the American dream and also look back to the past. Okay. And this suggests it has a lot of different implications for the things we talked about yesterday. It raises questions. Can we as America still hold on to our founding roots and the American dream at the same point? Is there a contradiction between saying on the one hand our founding fathers should be valued for what they did, that we should be treasuring what they did, and yet saying on the other hand, but we want to live whatever lives we want to be progressive, we want to be forward-looking, and so on. There's a tension between tradition and progress. Gatsby is trying to hold on to both. He's trying to hold on to what he and Daisy once had, and he's also trying to grow, but he can't really do both things at once. You can't both have progress and tradition at one point. You're going to have to abandon one for the other. The whole thing breaks. And that's one of the things I think, I think The Great Gatsby is suggesting here. You can't really hold on to both. Unless perhaps you're uber rich like Tom and Daisy. Maybe then you have a bit of an excuse. But for the average Joe, for the average person, you can't really do that. All right? And we can see this even in the symbols that are present in the work. Okay, we talked about the color yellow earlier. There's a lot of Gatsby's possessions that are described as yellow. Yellow, of course, the color of gold. Okay, yellow is a very important color. It represents the American dream, this quest for wealth, this quest for happiness. Gatsby talks about his golden toilet seat, all these other golden things he has. But then, of course, Myrtle is killed by a yellow car. because symbolically there's a sense in which it's this quest for the American dream that everyone's pursuing that ends up killing Myrtle. There's a problem perhaps with the American dream. We can see this with the green light at the end of Daisy's dock. It represented, for Gatsby, it represented the American dream. That's stated rather explicitly in the work. He looks at this green light and hopes that it's able to, bring him where he wants. And yet, what does Nick say about this at the end of the book? Nick says this. He says, Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms farther, and one fine morning... So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. And it suggests at the end of the book here that the green light is a lie. That the American dream itself is a lie. That's a promise that we all want to strive for. Everyone wants the American dream. Everyone wants a good life. Everyone wants to, leave their life better than they came into it. Leave a better inheritance for their children than they received. But Fitzgerald suggests, he says, look, when you look around at our society, most people can't live the American dream because of external pressures. And what is it that prevents, people from living the American dream? Well, we can have a whole debate about that. Is it the presence of landed wealth? Are some people like Tom and Daisy so wealthy that for the rest of the people they can't achieve the American dream? Or is the problem perhaps even just ourselves? Is the problem that we can't abandon the past, that the American dream requires us to destroy the past, and yet we're unable to do that because of who we are as humans. As Fitzgerald says here in the back, at the end of the book, we are born back ceaselessly into the past. We can't escape the past no matter how much we try. And because we can't escape the past, we can't achieve the American dream either. We can't achieve that green light. Okay? There's multiple different ways you could take, get Fitzgerald's critique, whether it's a critique of societies or critiques of individuals. I'll let you think about which you think is the case. But either way, Fitzgerald thinks that there's a problem with our pursuit of the American dream. He thinks it's unrealistic. He thinks we're not able to achieve it, and thus, as a result, why bother? All right? It's not a really pleasant ending for the book, but it raises questions that are important to us, especially given, where we are right now in modern-day America. Certainly Fitzgerald wasn't the only person who believed that the American dream wasn't possible. You have many today who also raise similar critiques and say that the American dream is just that it's a dream. It can't become a reality, in the current state of America. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. Okay, I want you to think about that, and that's going to lead to your journal question for today, to think about whether or not the American dream can be achieved and what you think Fitzgerald is suggesting here for us to learn at the end of The Great Gatsby. All right? We'll be moving on after The Great Gatsby to be talking about Of Mice and Men, which is similarly going to be looking at the American dream and raising its own questions and critiques, and yet questions and critiques that are different than The Great Gatsby. So we'll begin looking at that beginning tomorrow. For today, though, I want you to think about this question that's posed at the end of The Great Gatsby. Is it good for us to pursue the American dream? Is the American dream realistic for us to pursue? And what does it look like to have an ideal society, a society that enables people from pursuing the good life, rather than one that presents it? The Great Gatsby is one of my favorite books for these questions it raises, and I hope it helps you think about these questions as well. Class is dismissed.